But as we left the courtroom, I saw Emma sitting alone on a bench in the hallway, sobbing. Mark was trying to comfort her, but she was inconsolable. I lost him, she was saying. I lost my baby. Despite everything she'd done to me, despite the why. Months of legal battles and emotional trauma, I felt sorry for her. She had genuinely loved Gabriel, and losing him was devastating for her. I walked over to where she was sitting. "Emma," I said quietly. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry for everything I put you through. I wanted to be a mother so badly, and when Gabriel was born and you were unconscious, I thought maybe this was my chance." "I know," I said. "I understand why you did it. But Emma, you can't steal someone's child no matter how much you want to be a mother." "I know," she said. "I know it was wrong. I fell in love with him, and I convinced myself that I was doing what was best for him." "You were doing what was best for you," I said. "But I understand that you love him, and I meant what I said before. We can figure out a way for you to still be part of his life. He's going to need his aunt." Emma looked up at me with surprise. "You would let me see him? After everything I did?" "Not right away," I said. "I need time to bond with him, to establish myself as his mother. But eventually, yes. Gabriel deserves to know his whole family, including you." "Thank you," Emma whispered. "Thank you for being more generous than I deserve." That evening, I sat in Gabriel's nursery, holding him while he slept, finally able to relax for the first time in months. He was mine. Legally, officially, permanently. Mine. No one could take him away from me again. "We're home, baby," I whispered to him. "We're finally home." Gabriel stirred in his sleep, making the soft baby sounds that I was still learning to interpret. He was 10 months old now, crawling everywhere, pulling himself up to standing, babbling constantly in his own baby language. I had missed so much of his early development, but I was determined not to miss anything else. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How are you feeling, mija?" "Complete," I texted back. "For the first time since the accident, I feel complete." And it was true. The months of fighting, the legal battles, the emotional trauma, all of it had been worth it to have Gabriel back where he belonged. Emma had tried to steal my son, but she had underestimated the power of a mother's love and determination. Gabriel was home, and I was never letting him go again. As I rocked him to sleep, I sang the Spanish lullaby that had become our special song, the one that had helped him remember me even after months of separation. His breathing deepened, and he relaxed completely in my arms, trusting and safe. "Te amo, mi niño," I whispered. "Mama's here now, and I'm never leaving you again." The nightmare was over. My son was home, and our real life together was just beginning. 2 months into the legal battle, I got my first glimpse of Gabriel. The court had ordered supervised visitation while the adoption challenge was pending, and I was finally going to see my son for the first time since he was born. The visitation center was a sterile, institutional building with beige walls and fluorescent lighting. It felt more like a prison than a place where families were supposed to reconnect. But I didn't care about the setting. I was about to hold my baby. Emma arrived first, carrying Gabriel in an expensive car seat. She looked tired and stressed, like the legal proceedings were taking their toll on her. But when she lifted Gabriel out of the carrier, my breath caught in my throat. He was beautiful. Perfect. 8 months old now, with dark hair like mine and bright brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He was wearing a little blue outfit that I didn't recognize, and he was clutching a stuffed elephant that Emma must have bought for him. "Hello, Gabriel," I whispered, and at the sound of my voice, he turned to look at me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. This was my son, the baby I'd carried for 8 months, the child I'd dreamed about and planned for and loved before he was even born, and he was looking at me like I was a complete stranger. "His name is Daniel," Emma said quietly. "He doesn't respond to Gabriel anymore." The social worker supervising the visit, a kind woman named Margaret, gestured for me to sit down. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Emma reluctantly handed Gabriel to me, and the moment I felt his weight, in my arms, something inside me clicked into place. This was right. This was where he belonged. Gabriel, I refused to call him Daniel, looked up at me with curious eyes. He didn't cry, didn't seem afraid, just studied my face with the intense concentration that babies have when they're trying to figure something out. "Hi, baby," I said softly. "I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to meet you." "He doesn't know you," Emma said, and there was pain in her voice. "You're confusing him." But Gabriel didn't look confused. He reached up with one tiny hand and touched my face, his fingers exploring my cheek, my nose, my lips. It was like he was trying to memorize me. "He's so big," I said, marveling at how much he'd grown. "And so alert." "He's very advanced for his age," Emma said, and I could hear the pride in her voice. "He's already crawling, and he's starting to pull himself up to standing. The pediatrician says he's in the 95th percentile for all his developmental milestones." I felt a stab of pain. Emma had been there for all of Gabriel's firsts: his first smile, his first laugh, his first time sitting up, his first solid food. All the moments I should have experienced had been stolen from me. "What does he like?" I asked. "What makes him happy?" Emma hesitated, like she didn't want to share information that might help me bond with him. "He likes music," she said finally. "Classical music, especially. And he loves books. I read to him every night before bed." I started humming a lullaby I'd sung to him when he was in the womb, a Spanish song my grandmother had sung to me when I was little. Gabriel's eyes widened and he turned his head toward me, listening intently. "He recognizes that," Margaret observed. "His body language changed when you started singing." "I sang to him every day when I was pregnant," I said, continuing to hum. "It was our special song." Emma's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. He's never heard that song before." But Gabriel was responding to the music, his little body relaxing against me, his eyes starting to droop like the melody was soothing him. It was as if some deep cellular memory was being activated. "Babies can remember sounds from the womb," Margaret explained. "Music, voices, rhythms they heard during pregnancy can be comforting to them even months later." I spent the next hour holding Gabriel, singing to him, talking to him, trying to pack a lifetime of love into 60 minutes. He fell asleep in my arms, and I just sat there, memorizing his face, his smell, the weight of him against my chest. When the visit was over, and Emma took him away, I felt like part of my soul was being ripped out. But I also felt something else. Hope. Gabriel had responded to me. He had recognized my voice, my song. The bond between us hadn't been broken by 6 months of separation. "How did it go?" Patricia asked when I called her that evening. "He knew me," I said. I know that sounds crazy, but he recognized my voice. When I sang to him, he calmed down immediately. "That's good," Patricia said. "It supports our argument that the biological bond between you and Gabriel is still intact, despite the separation." "What's our next step?" "We have a hearing next week to present our evidence challenging the adoption," Patricia said. "I've subpoenaed the records from Emma's attorney, and I've found some very interesting discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" "The medical reports he presented to the court about your prognosis were selectively edited," Patricia explained. "He included all the negative assessments, but left out the reports from doctors who were optimistic about your recovery." "Is that legal?" "It's not illegal, but it's misleading," Patricia said. "It shows that he was deliberately painting a bleaker picture of your condition than was warranted by the medical evidence." "What about Jessica Chen's testimony?" "That's where things get really interesting," Patricia said. "I've been investigating her background, and it turns out she has her own connection to Emma's attorney. She's his paralegal sister-in-law." "So, it was all coordinated?" "It looks that way," Patricia said. "Emma's attorney used his connections to find people who would testify in favor of the adoption, even if they barely knew you." The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing my testimony, gathering evidence of my bond with Gabriel, and trying to stay calm despite the fact that my entire future as a mother was hanging in the balance. The ER. Courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. Emma sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. She looked nervous, constantly fidgeting with her wedding ring and avoiding eye contact with me. Judge Catherine Morrison was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. She listened intently as Patricia presented our case, outlining the irregularities in the adoption proceedings and the evidence of Emma's deception. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "the respondent obtained this adoption through a pattern of misrepresentation and fraud. She deliberately misled the court about the petitioner's prognosis, her family support system, and her wishes regarding custody. She also presented false testimony from witnesses who barely knew the petitioner." Emma's attorney, David Kellerman, stood up to respond. "Your Honor, my client acted in the best interests of the child. The petitioner was in a coma with an uncertain prognosis. Someone had to make decisions about the baby's care, and my client stepped up to provide a loving, stable home." "By lying to the court?" Patricia shot back. "By claiming that Ms. Martinez had no family support when her parents were available and willing to help? By presenting edited medical reports that made her condition seem hopeless?" "The medical reports were accurate," Kellerman said. "My client made difficult decisions based on the information available at the time." Judge Morrison held up her hand for silence. "I've reviewed the case file, and I have serious concerns about the procedures followed in this adoption. Mr. Kellerman, can you explain why your client filed for adoption just 2 weeks after the child was born, when the mother was still in critical condition?" Kellerman looked uncomfortable. "The child needed permanent placement, Your Honor. Temporary guardianship would have created uncertainty about his future." "Uncertainty for whom?" Judge Morrison asked. "For the child or for your client who wanted to ensure she could keep him permanently?" "For the child, Your Honor. Studies show that early bonding and attachment are crucial for infant development. Studies also show that children benefit from being with their biological parents when possible," Judge Morrison said. Dryly, "Ms. Chen, I'd like to hear from you directly. Why did you feel it was necessary to adopt your sister's child rather than simply caring for him until she recovered?" Emma stood up, her hands shaking. "Your Honor, the doctor said Rebecca might never wake up. They said even if she did, she might have severe brain damage, that she might not be capable of caring for a child. I couldn't let Daniel go into foster care. I love him. I've been his mother for 8 months. But you didn't consult with Ms. Martinez's parents before making this decision." Emma hesitated. "They live in Phoenix. They're older. They have health problems. I thought it would be better for Daniel to stay in Denver. Did you tell them about the adoption proceedings?" I thought it was better to handle it locally." Judge Morrison made a note. "Ms. Martinez, I understand you've had supervised visitation with your son. How did that go?" I stood up, my heart pounding. "He recognized me, Your Honor. When I sang to him, the same song I sang when he was in the womb, he calmed down immediately. The social worker said his body language changed, that he was responding to familiar sounds. And how do you feel about your ability to care for him now?" "I'm fully recovered, Your Honor. I'm back at work. I have a stable income. I have family support. I'm ready to be his mother." Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment, reviewing her notes. Finally, she looked up. "This case presents a difficult situation," she said. "On one hand, we have evidence that the adoption may have been obtained through questionable means. On the other hand, we have a child who has been in a stable placement for 8 months. My heart sank. It sounded like she was going to rule in Emma's favor. "However," Judge Morrison continued, "I cannot ignore the irregularities in this case. The speed of the adoption, the failure to adequately represent the biological mother's interests, the selective presentation of medical evidence, all of these factors raise serious questions about the validity of the adoption." She paused, and the courtroom was completely silent. "I am ordering a full investigation into the circumstances of this adoption," Judge Morrison said. "In the meantime, I am expanding Ms. Martinez's visitation rights to include overnight visits. with the goal of gradually transitioning custody back to her. Emma gasped, and I felt tears of relief streaming down my face. This transition will be supervised and gradual, Judge Morrison continued. The child's well-being is my primary concern, and any changes to his living situation must be made carefully. But it is clear that his biological mother is capable of caring for him, and she has the right to do so. As we left the courtroom, Emma was crying. "You're going to traumatize him," she said to me. "He doesn't know you. Taking him away from me is going to hurt him." "I'm not taking him away from you," I said. "I'm taking him home where he belongs. You can still be his aunt, Emma. You can still be part of his life. But I'm his mother." "I've been his mother for 8 months," Emma said desperately. "And I'll be his mother for the rest of his life," I replied. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt like I could finally breathe again. It wasn't over yet. The transition would take time, and there would be more hearings, more legal battles. But for the first time since waking up from my coma, I felt like I was going to get my son back. Gabriel was coming home. The transition process was both the most hopeful and most heartbreaking period of my life. Over the next 6 weeks, my visits with Gabriel gradually increased from supervised hours to unsupervised afternoons, then to overnight stays, and finally to weekends at my apartment. Each step was a small victory, but also a reminder of how much time we'd lost. Gabriel was confused at first. He would cry for Emma during our early visits, reaching for her when she dropped him off, calling Mama in her direction. Each time it happened, I felt like I was being stabbed in the heart, but I also understood that he was just a baby who had bonded with the person who had cared for him. It wasn't his fault that person wasn't his biological mother. "It's going to take time," Margaret, the social worker, reminded me during one particularly difficult visit when Gabriel had cried for an hour straight. "He's not rejecting you personally. He's just confused by the changes in his routine." But slowly, gradually, Gabriel began to respond to me. The breakthrough came during our 3rd overnight visit, when he woke up crying in the middle of the night. I went to his crib and started singing the Spanish lullaby I'd sung to him in the womb. He stopped crying immediately, looking up at me, with those bright brown eyes, and then he smiled. It was the first time he'd smiled at me, and I cried with relief and joy. "That's it, baby," I whispered. "You remember Mama's voice, don't you?" From that night on, things got easier. Gabriel started reaching for me when I arrived for visits. He would babble and laugh when I sang to him. He began sleeping through the night in my apartment, no longer crying for Emma when bedtime came. But the transition wasn't just difficult for Gabriel. It was destroying Emma. Each time she dropped him off for a visit, she looked more haggard, more desperate. She would linger at my door, asking about his eating schedule, his nap times, whether he'd been fussy. "He likes his bottle warm to exactly body temperature," she would say. "And he won't sleep unless you rub his back in small circles. And if he gets cranky in the afternoon, try playing Mozart. It always calms him down." I understood that she was trying to help, but it also felt like she was trying to maintain some level of control over Gabriel's care. She had been his mother for 8 months, and letting go was clearly agonizing for her. The hardest moment came during our 4th week of transition visits. Emma arrived to drop Gabriel off, and he immediately reached for me instead of clinging to her. The look of devastation on her face was heartbreaking. "He doesn't need me anymore," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's already forgotten me." "He hasn't forgotten you," I said gently. "Emma, you raised him for 8 months. You'll always be important to him, but I'm his mother." "I know," she said, but her voice was broken. "I know you're his mother. I love him so much, Rebecca. I love him like he's my own." "I know you do," I said, "and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that you loved him and cared for him when I couldn't. But he needs to be with me now." Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. Can I still see him sometimes, after the transition is complete?" I thought about this. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to cut Emma out of our lives completely as punishment for what she'd done. But Gabriel had bonded with her, and she had genuinely loved and cared for him. "We'll figure something out," I said. maybe supervised visits or family gatherings. But Emma, you have to understand that I'm his mother now. You can't undermine that or confuse him about who he belongs to. I understand, Emma said. I just want what's best for him. Then you want him to be with me, I said. The final custody hearing was scheduled for a Friday in November, exactly 3 months after I'd first challenged the adoption. By then, Gabriel had been staying with me full-time for 2 weeks, and the transition was complete. He was sleeping in the crib I'd set up for him before the accident, playing with toys I'd bought him, calling me Mama in his sweet baby voice. The courtroom was packed this time. My parents had flown in from Phoenix, along with my brother and several other family members. Emma's side of the courtroom was notably emptier, just her, Mark, and her attorney. Judge Morrison reviewed the social worker's reports, the evidence of Gabriel's successful transition to my care, and the investigation findings about the irregularities in the original adoption. The investigation has confirmed that there were significant procedural violations in the original adoption, Judge Morrison said. The biological mother's rights were terminated without adequate representation. False. Testimony was presented to the court, and medical evidence was selectively edited to support the adoption petition. Emma's attorney tried one last time to argue that disrupting Gabriel's placement would be harmful to him, but Judge Morrison cut him off. Mr. Kellerman, the child has successfully transitioned to his biological mother's care. The social worker's reports indicate that he is thriving in her custody. Your argument that he would be harmed by being with his biological mother is not supported by the evidence. Judge Morrison looked directly at me. Ms. Martinez, I am hereby overturning the adoption and restoring your full parental rights to your son. The child will remain in your custody permanently. The relief was overwhelming. I started crying, and my parents rushed forward to hug me. After 10 months of fighting, Gabriel was finally, legally, officially mine again. Where were your parents during all this? Patricia asked. They live in Phoenix, I said. They flew out as soon as they heard about the accident, but they had to go back after a few weeks because of my dad's health issues. Emma told them she would handle everything, that she would keep them updated on my condition. Did she keep them updated on the adoption proceedings? I thought about this. I don't think so. When I called them from the hospital, they seemed shocked to learn that Emma had adopted Gabriel. They thought she was just babysitting him until I woke up. Patricia made a note. So your sister deliberately kept your parents in the dark about the adoption, which prevented them from objecting or offering to take custody themselves. It gets worse, Linda said. Your sister also claimed that you had specifically asked her to adopt the baby if anything happened to you. She said you had discussed it during your pregnancy and that it was your express wish. That's a complete lie, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I never said anything like that. If anything, I would have wanted my parents to take custody, not Emma. Do you have any documentation of your wishes regarding custody? Patricia asked. A will? A letter? Anything in writing? No, I admitted. I was only 8 months pregnant. I hadn't thought about. I never imagined something like this could happen. That's normal, Linda said. Most young, healthy pregnant. Women don't prepare for catastrophic scenarios. But your sister used that against you. She argued that your failure to make formal custody arrangements proved that you weren't prepared to be a responsible parent. I was starting to understand the scope of Emma's deception. She hadn't just taken advantage of my unconscious state. She had systematically lied to the court, presented false evidence, and manipulated the legal system to steal my child. There's something else, Linda said. I've been going through the case files, and I found something disturbing. Your sister's attorney filed a petition for adoption just 2 weeks after your son was born. 2 weeks? I repeated. But I was still in critical condition. The doctors were still trying to determine the extent of my brain injury. Exactly, Linda said. Most guardianship cases involve months of evaluation, family studies, home visits. But your sister's attorney pushed for an expedited adoption, claiming that the baby's well-being required immediate permanent placement. That's highly unusual, Patricia said. Courts don't typically rush adoption proceedings, especially when the biological parent is still alive and their prognosis is uncertain. Unless someone is pulling strings, Linda said. Your sister's attorney has connections in the family court system. He's known for getting favorable rulings in difficult cases. Are you saying the adoption was corrupt? I asked. I'm saying it was highly irregular, Linda said carefully. The speed of the proceedings, the lack of adequate representation for you, the failure to notify your extended family, none of it follows standard protocol. Patricia was taking notes furiously. This is exactly what we need to challenge the adoption. If we can prove that the process was flawed, that your sister committed perjury, that you weren't adequately represented, we have grounds for overturning the adoption. How long will that take? I asked. Months, possibly longer, Patricia said, honestly. Family court moves slowly, especially in cases involving established custody arrangements. But Rebecca, I have to warn you, even if we prove that the adoption was improper, the court's primary concern will be what's in Gabriel's best interest now. What do you mean? I mean that your sister has been his primary caregiver for 6 months, Patricia explained. He's bonded with her. He knows her as his mother. The court might decide that disrupting that relationship would be harmful to him, even if the original adoption was obtained fraudulently. The thought of losing Gabriel, permanently because Emma had successfully bonded with him, made me feel sick. She had stolen my child and then used the time she'd stolen to build a case for keeping him. So what do we do? I asked. We build the strongest possible case, Patricia said. We gather evidence of your sister's deception. We document your recovery and your ability to care for Gabriel, and we argue that the adoption should be overturned because it was based on fraud. And we pray that the judge values truth and justice over maintaining the status quo, Linda added. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house in Phoenix to get their side of the story. The 5-hour drive gave me time to think about everything Linda had told us, and by the time I arrived, I was furious. My parents were waiting for me on their front porch, and the moment I saw them, I broke down crying. They held me while I sobbed, and for the first time since waking up from my coma, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. We had no idea, my mother said when I told them about Emma's lies to the court. She told us she was just taking care of Gabriel temporarily, that she was waiting for you to wake up so she could give him back to you. She never mentioned adoption proceedings? I asked. Never, my father said. If we had known, we would have flown out immediately. We would have fought for custody ourselves. Why didn't you? I asked. I mean, when Gabriel was first born, why didn't you take him? My parents exchanged a look. Emma convinced us that it would be better for him to stay in Denver, close to the hospital where you were being treated, my mother said. She said the doctors thought you might wake up any day, and she wanted Gabriel to be nearby so you could bond with him immediately. She also said she had already set up a nursery, that she had taken time off work to care for him, that moving him to Phoenix would be disruptive, my father added. It all sounded reasonable at the time. Did she ever mention that she was having fertility problems? I asked. My mother nodded. She'd been trying to get pregnant for years. She was devastated by her miscarriages. When Gabriel was born, she seemed so happy to be able to help care for him. We thought it was therapeutic for her. It was therapeutic, I said bitterly. So therapeutic that she decided to keep him permanently. We're going to help you fight this, my father said. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. Gabriel is our grandson, and he belongs with you. Emma's going to argue that taking him away from her would be traumatic for him, I said. What's traumatic is a child being raised by someone who stole him, my mother said fiercely. What's traumatic is growing up believing lies about his identity and his family. That evening, my parents and I went through photo albums and family videos, looking for evidence of my excitement about the pregnancy and my preparations for motherhood. We found dozens of pictures of me setting up the nursery, shopping for baby clothes, reading pregnancy books. We found videos of me talking to Gabriel in the womb, singing to him, telling him how much I loved him. This proves you were excited about being a mother, my mother said. This contradicts everything Emma told the court about your supposed doubts and depression. Will it be enough? I asked. It's a start, my father said. But Rebecca, You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this could take a long time. Emma has had 6 months to establish herself as Gabriel's mother. Overturning that isn't going to be easy. I don't care how long it takes, I said. Gabriel is my son. I'm not giving up on him. As I drove back to Denver the next morning, I thought about everything I'd learned. Emma hadn't just taken advantage of my coma. She had orchestrated an elaborate deception, lying to the court, manipulating the legal system, and keeping my own parents in the dark about her true intentions. But now I had allies. I had evidence. And I had the truth on my side. Emma might have had a 6-month head start, but I was awake now, and I was fighting back. She had underestimated the strength of a mother's love and the power of the truth. She was about to learn that stealing a child from an unconscious mother wasn't just morally wrong, it was legally vulnerable. And I was going to exploit every vulnerability until I brought my son home. The baby's crying had stopped, and I could hear Emma's voice inside the house, presumably comforting him. The sound of her voice soothing my son was like a knife in my chest. I'm going to fight this, I said. I'm going to take you to court, and I'm going to get my son back. You can try, Emma said. But Rebecca, think about what's best for Daniel. He's been with me for 6 months. I'm the only mother he's ever known. Taking him away from me now would be traumatic for him. Is that really what you want? To traumatize your own child just to satisfy your need to be his mother? The manipulation in her words was breathtaking. She was using my love for Gabriel against me, suggesting that fighting for him would somehow hurt him. But I could see through her tactics now. What's traumatic is a child being separated from his biological mother, I said. What's traumatic is growing up believing a lie about who he is and where he came from. He'll know the truth, Emma said. When he's older, we'll tell him about you, about the accident, about your coma. He'll understand that I stepped in when you couldn't be there for him. You'll tell him that his aunt stole him from his unconscious mother and decided to keep him? I asked. That's the story you're planning to tell? Emma's face flushed. I'll tell him that I loved him enough to make sure he had a stable home when his biological mother wasn't able to care for him. I'm able to care for him now, I said. I'm awake, I'm recovered, I'm ready to be his mother. It's too late, Emma said. He's bonded with me. I'm his attachment figure. Separating us now would cause him psychological damage. I stared at my sister, this woman I'd loved and protected my entire life, and realized that she had become someone I didn't recognize. The Emma I knew would never have stolen a baby. The Emma I knew would have been counting the days until I woke up so she could return my son to me. But this Emma had spent 6 months bonding with my child, and now she couldn't bear to give him up. She'd convinced herself that keeping him was somehow noble, that she was protecting him rather than stealing him. I'm going to court, I said again, and I'm going to prove that you had no right to adopt my son while I was unconscious. The court will consider what's in Daniel's best interests, Emma said, and his best interests are staying with the only mother he's ever known. As I walked back to my car, I could hear Gabriel crying again inside the house. Every step away from him felt like betrayal, like abandonment. But I knew that forcing a confrontation now wouldn't help my case. I needed to be smart about this. I needed legal help. The lawyer I'd called was named Patricia Hawkins, the same attorney who had helped my friend Sarah with her divorce. Patricia specialized in family law, and when I explained my situation over the phone, she'd agreed to see me immediately. This is one of the most egregious cases I've ever heard, Patricia said after I'd told her the whole story. Your sister essentially stole your child while you were incapacitated and then legally adopted him to cover her tracks. Can we get him back? I asked. It's going to be complicated, Patricia said honestly. Your sister does have legal custody now, and courts are generally reluctant to disrupt a child's established living situation. But the circumstances of the adoption are highly questionable. What do you mean? I mean that typically, when a parent is incapacitated, the state doesn't immediately terminate parental rights and put the child up for adoption, Patricia explained. There should have been a guardian appointed, someone to make decisions on your behalf while you were unconscious. The fact that your sister was able to adopt your son so quickly suggests that either the system failed catastrophically or she manipulated the process. How could she manipulate it? By presenting herself as the only viable option for the child's care, by downplaying your chances of recovery, by emphasizing the need for permanent placement rather than temporary guardianship, Patricia said. If she had good legal representation and you had none, it would have been relatively easy for her to convince a judge that adoption was in the child's best interests. So what do? We challenge the adoption, Patricia said. We argue that your parental rights were terminated without due process, that you weren't adequately represented, that the adoption was based on false information about your prognosis. Will that work? I don't know, Patricia said honestly. But we have to try. The alternative is accepting that your sister can steal children from unconscious mothers and face no consequences. That evening, I sat in my empty apartment, looking at the nursery I'd prepared for Gabriel before the accident. The crib was still assembled, the mobile still hung over it, the tiny clothes still folded in the dresser. Everything was exactly as I'd left it 8 months ago, waiting for a baby who had been living in someone else's house, calling someone else mama. I picked up one of the tiny onesies I'd bought, holding it against my chest and trying to imagine what Gabriel looked like now. Was he crawling? Was he saying any words? Did he have my eyes or his father's? Did he smile like I did or cry like his father had? All of these milestones, all of these precious moments had been stolen from me. And Emma had convinced herself that she was the hero of this story, that she had saved Gabriel rather than stolen him. But I was going to prove her wrong. I was going to fight for my son with everything I had, and I was going to bring him home, where he belonged. The legal battle was just beginning, but I was ready for it. Emma might have had a 6-month head start, but I had something she didn't. The unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, and I was going to use that bond to bring my son home. The first breakthrough in my case came from an unexpected source. The hospital social worker who had been assigned to Gabriel's case when he was born. Her name was Linda Rodriguez, and when Patricia tracked her down, she was horrified to learn what had happened. I never recommended adoption, Linda told us, during our meeting at Patricia's office. I specifically recommended temporary guardianship with your sister until you recovered. The adoption was never supposed to happen. Then how did it happen? I asked. Linda looked uncomfortable. Your sister hired a very aggressive attorney. He argued that your prognosis was hopeless, that you would never wake up, and that the baby needed permanent placement for his psychological well-being. He presented medical reports that made your condition sound much worse than it actually was. What kind of medical reports? Patricia asked. Reports that emphasized the severity of your brain injury while downplaying your chances of recovery, Linda said. He also had character witnesses who testified that you had been struggling with depression during your pregnancy, that you had expressed doubts about your ability to be a mother. I felt like I'd been slapped. That's not true. I was excited. About having Gabriel, I never expressed doubts about being a mother. I know, Linda said. I was there for most of your prenatal visits. You were clearly thrilled about the pregnancy, but your sister's attorney presented a very different picture. Who were these character witnesses? Patricia asked. Linda consulted. Her notes. Your sister, obviously, her husband, and someone named Jessica Chen, who claimed to be your best friend. My blood went cold. Jessica Chen was Emma's friend, not mine. I'd met her a few times at family gatherings, but we barely knew each other. The idea that she would testify about my mental state during pregnancy was absurd. Jessica Chen is not my best friend, I said. She's Emma's friend. I've probably spoken to her a total of 10 times in my entire life. That's perjury, Patricia said grimly. If she testified under oath about your mental state and your relationship, and she was lying, that's a felony. There's more, Linda said. Your sister also claimed that you had no support system, no family other than her, and no financial means to care for the baby. She painted a picture of you as an isolated, depressed single mother who would be unable to provide for the child, even if you did wake up. None of that is true, I said. I have a good job, I have savings, I have friends, and I have family, my parents, my brother, my aunts and uncles. Emma made it sound like she was the only person in my life. I didn't take him, Emma said. I rescued him. And Rebecca, you need to think about what's best for Daniel now. He's 6 months old. I'm the only mother he's ever known. Taking him away from me would be traumatic for him. Taking him away from you? I repeated incredulously. He's my son. You're the one who took him away from me. You were in a coma, Emma said again. You weren't capable of being his mother. I was. And I have been, for 6 months. That has to count for something. Dr. Chen stepped forward again. Ladies, I think we need to take a break here. Mrs. Martinez, you've just woken up from a 6-month coma. This is an enormous amount of information to process. Perhaps we should... I want to see him, I interrupted. I want to see my son, right now. Emma shook her head. That's not a good idea. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. This would be confusing for Daniel. His name is Gabriel, I said through gritted teeth. And I'm his mother. I have the right to see him. Actually, Emma said, and her voice was very quiet now, legally you don't. I'm his legal mother now. I have custody. I decide who he sees and when. The room went completely silent. Even the machines monitoring my vital signs seemed to pause. Emma had just told me that I had no legal right to see my own biological son. Get out, I said. Rebecca, get out, I screamed. Get out of my room! Get away from me! Emma gathered her purse and jacket, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry it happened this way. But Rebecca, I love him. I love him so much. And he loves me. I'm his mom now. After she left, I lay in my hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had been completely destroyed while I was unconscious. I'd lost 6 months of my life, 6 months of my son's life, and apparently, I'd lost my son himself. But as the shock began to wear off, it was replaced by something else: determination. Emma might have legal custody of Gabriel, but biology and love were on my side. He was my son, conceived in love, carried with joy, and I would not let my sister's betrayal stand. I didn't know how I was going to get him back, but I knew one thing. For certain, I would fight for my son with every breath in my body. Emma had made the mistake of thinking that, because I'd been unconscious, I was powerless. She was about to learn how wrong she was. 3 days after waking up from my coma, I was discharged from the hospital with a stack of medications, a list of follow-up appointments, and a burning determination to reclaim my son. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. The second thing I did was drive to Emma's house to see Gabriel with my own eyes. Emma lived in a beautiful suburban neighborhood, about 20 minutes from my apartment, in a house she and her husband Mark had bought specifically because it had a perfect nursery. When I pulled into their driveway, I could see children's toys scattered across the front yard, a baby swing hanging from the oak tree, colorful plastic toys on the porch, a stroller parked by the front door. My son's toys, my son's life. Being. Lived in someone else's house. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Mark answered the door, and the look of shock and guilt on his face told me everything I needed to know. He'd been complicit in this. He'd known exactly what Emma was doing, and he'd supported her decision to steal my child. Rebecca, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. You're awake. I'm awake, I confirmed. And I want to see my son. Mark looked over his shoulder, presumably at Emma, then back at me. Rebecca, I don't think that's a good idea right now. Emma's really upset, and Daniel is napping, and... His name is Gabriel, I interrupted. And I'm his mother. I want to... See him. You can't just show up here, Emma's voice came from behind Mark. She appeared in the doorway, and I was shocked by how different she looked. She was wearing a milk-stained t-shirt and yoga pants. Her hair was in a messy ponytail, and she had the exhausted but content look of a new mother. She looked like she belonged in this house, with these toys, with my baby. I can show up anywhere I want, I said. This is America. But more importantly, my son is in this house and I want to see him. He's not your son anymore, Emma said, and her voice was steady but her hands were shaking. Legally, he's mine. I have the adoption papers. I have custody. I have parental rights. You have none of those things. I have biology, I said. I have 9 months of pregnancy. I have labor and delivery. I have the fact that he came from my body. Biology doesn't make you a mother, Emma said. Being there does. Caring for him does. Getting up with him every night for 6 months does. I'm his mother in every way that matters. I could hear crying from inside the house, a baby's cry, that made every cell in my body respond with desperate maternal instinct. That was my son crying, my Gabriel. He's crying, I said. Let me see him. No, Emma said firmly. Rebecca, you need to accept that this is how things are now. Daniel is my son. He's been my son for 6 months. Taking him away from me would be cruel to him and traumatic for everyone involved. Taking him away from you? I repeated, my voice rising. Emma, you took him away from me. While I was unconscious and helpless, you stole my baby. I saved him, Emma said again. The state was going to put him in foster care. I kept him safe. I kept him loved. I kept him in the family. By making him yours instead of keeping him mine, the baby's crying was getting louder, more insistent. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to push past Emma and Mark, to run into that house and comfort my child. But I could see Mark positioning himself to block me, and I realized that if I tried to force my way in, they would call the police. And legally, I would be the one in the wrong. I want to hold him, I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. Please, Emma. I'm his mother. I haven't seen him since he was born. I haven't held him. I haven't fed him. I haven't been able to comfort him when he cries. Please let me just hold him once. Emma's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I thought she might relent. But then she shook her head. It would confuse him, she said. He doesn't know you, Rebecca. You're a stranger to him. It wouldn't be fair to him to introduce confusion into his life right now. I'm not a stranger, I said, and now I was crying. I'm his mother. I carried him for 8 months. I sang to him. I talked to him. I loved him before he was even born. But you weren't there when he needed you, Emma said, and her voice was getting harder again. I was. I was there for his first smile, his first laugh, his first time sleeping through the night. I was there when he was sick, when he was scared, when he needed comfort. You weren't. Because I was in a coma, I shouted. Because I was unconscious. I didn't choose to miss those things, Emma. You chose to take them from me. I chose to give them to him, Emma corrected. I chose to make sure he had a mother who was present, who was capable of caring for him. When I woke up from a 6-month coma, the first thing I asked for was my baby. The nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances, the doctors mumbled about taking things slowly, and my sister Emma sat in the corner of my hospital room with tears in, her eyes holding a secret that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. It took me 3 days to learn the truth. While I was unconscious, fighting for my life, my sister had been raising my son, and now she was claiming he was hers. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and this is the story of how I lost 6 months of my life to a traumatic brain injury, only to wake up and discover that I'd lost something far more precious, my newborn son, taken by the person I trusted most in the world. This is about how my sister Emma, who had been trying to have a baby for years, saw my coma as an opportunity to finally become a mother. And this is about the fight I had to wage to reclaim my own child from the woman who had raised him from birth. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. I was 8 months pregnant, driving to my final prenatal appointment before my due date, when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into my car at 60 miles per hour. The impact sent my Honda Civic spinning across 3 lanes of traffic before it crashed into a concrete barrier. The last thing I remembered was the sound of shattering glass and the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that something terrible was happening to my baby. I woke up 6 months later in Denver General Hospital, my head wrapped in bandages, my body weak from months of inactivity, and my stomach flat. The pregnancy was gone. My baby was gone. And for those first terrifying moments of consciousness, I thought I'd lost everything. Rebecca? The voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, the neurologist who had been overseeing my care. "Can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from months of intubation. When I finally managed to croak out words, they were the only ones that mattered. "My baby. Where's my baby?" Dr. Chen's expression was carefully neutral. "Let's focus on you right now. You've been unconscious for 6 months. You suffered a severe traumatic brain injury in a car accident. The fact that you're awake and speaking is nothing short of miraculous." "My baby," I repeated more urgently, this time. "I was pregnant. Where is my baby?" "Your baby is safe," Dr. Chen said carefully. "But Rebecca, we need to take this slowly. You've been through a tremendous trauma, and there are things we need to discuss gradually." That's when I noticed Emma sitting in the corner of the room. My younger sister looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in weeks. She was wearing a loose-fitting sweater and jeans, and there was something different about her that I couldn't quite identify. She looked maternal, like she'd been caring for someone. "Emma?" I said, and my voice broke with relief. "Thank God you're here. Where's my baby? Is he okay? Please tell me he's okay." Emma's face crumpled, and she started crying. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" Panic was rising in my chest. "Emma, what happened to my baby?" "He's alive," Emma said quickly. "He's healthy and beautiful and perfect. But Rebecca, there are things you need to know, things that happened while you were unconscious." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Mrs. Martinez, your son was born via emergency. Cesarean section immediately after your accident. He was premature but healthy. He's been well cared for during your recovery." "Where is he?" I demanded. "I want to see him right now." Emma and Dr. Chen exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. There was something they weren't telling me, something that was making them both uncomfortable. "He's at home," Emma said finally. "With me. Rebecca, you were in a coma. The doctors didn't know if you would ever wake up. Someone had to take care of him." "Of course someone had to take care of him," I said. "You're his aunt. Thank you for watching him. But I'm awake now, so I can take him home." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma was crying harder now, and Dr. Chen was looking at her chart like it contained answers to questions she didn't want to ask. "Emma," I said, and my voice was getting stronger as the panic set in. "Where is my son?" He's with me," Emma said. "Rebecca, you have to understand. You were unconscious for 6 months. The doctor said you might never wake up. I had to make decisions. I had to think about what was best for him." "What kind of decisions?" Emma took a shaky breath. "I've been raising him as my own. Legally, I mean. I adopted him." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You what?" "I adopted him," Emma repeated, and now she was sobbing. "Rebecca, you were in a coma. The state was going to put him in foster care. I couldn't let that happen. So I petitioned the court for guardianship, and then I adopted him." "You adopted my son?" I could barely get the words out. "You adopted my baby while I was unconscious? I was trying to protect him," Emma said desperately. "I was trying to keep him safe until you woke up. But the months went by and the doctor said, you might never recover, and I fell in love with him, Rebecca. He's been my son for 6 months. He doesn't know any other mother." I stared at my sister, trying to process what she was telling me. While I'd been fighting for my life, unconscious and helpless, she had taken my newborn son and legally made him hers. She had been raising him, bonding with him, becoming his mother while I lay in a hospital bed. "His name," I said suddenly. "What did you name him?" Emma looked down at her hands. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Daniel James." "That's not his name," I said, and my voice was getting louder. "His name is Gabriel. Gabriel Antonio Martinez. I chose that name. I had it picked out for months." "I know," Emma said, "but he's been Daniel for 6 months. That's the name on his birth certificate, on his adoption papers. That's who he is now." "He's not Daniel," I shouted, and several nurses came running into the room. "His name is Gabriel, and he's my son." You can't just steal someone's baby and change their name. Mrs. Martinez, please calm down, Dr. Chen said. Your blood pressure is spiking. This kind of stress isn't good for your recovery. I don't care about my recovery, I screamed. I want my son. I want Gabriel. Rebecca, please, Emma said, standing up and approaching my bed. I know this is hard to understand, but I did what I thought was best. You were in a coma. The doctor said you had less than a 20% chance of waking up. I couldn't let him go into the system. So you stole him instead? I saved him, Emma said, and suddenly there was steel in her voice. I saved him from becoming a ward of the state. I gave him a loving home, a stable environment. I've been his mother for 6 months, Rebecca. I'm the only mother he's ever known. You're not his mother. I was crying now, great gasping sobs that made my chest ache. I'm his mother. I carried him for 8 months. I felt him kick. I talked to him. I sang to him. You can't just take that away from me. I didn't take anything away from you, Emma said, and her voice was getting colder. You were unconscious, Rebecca. You weren't there. I was. I was the one who held him when he cried, who fed him every night, who took him to doctor's appointments, who worried about him when he was sick. I've been his mother in every way that matters. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't even process it. This was Emma, my little sister, who I'd protected and supported our entire lives. Emma, who had been trying to get pregnant for 3 years with her husband, Mark. Emma, who had cried on my shoulder when her fertility treatments failed, who had been so excited when I got pregnant, who had promised to be the best aunt in the world. How could you do this to me? I whispered. How could you take my baby?